welcome to the Automation Guild, where we help you succeed in creating automation awesomeness. This is where we all come together to help each other with a tip, tool, or technique that can help us succeed with our automation efforts. We'll be starting in a few minutes, and today's episode is going to be on headless browsing. So, do you use headless browsers? If so, let me know in the chat. Say either yes or no. I'm just curious to know how many people actually use headless browsing. And I'm going to go over some of the pros and cons of using it and some news around this particular area. And that's why I chose it for today's episode. So we'll be starting in a few minutes. And I'm just going to go start up my chat. So if you're in the chat, if you're watching now, just let me know. Are you using headless browsing? Type a yes or no in the chat below. All right, so welcome to the Automation Guild, where we help each other succeed in creating automation awesomeness. I'm your host, Joe, from Colantonio.com, Test Talks and Guild Conferences, a blog, podcast, and online conference dedicated to all things test automation. And if you don't know, I have a new conference, Automation Guild 2018, that I'm planning. It's going to be the week of January 8th. That's the sponsor of this show today, Automation Guild. So to learn more about Automation Guild, head on over to automationguild.com and register to get some automation awesomeness to get you off on the right foot in 2018. We have some of the biggest experts in the test automation field share a tip, tool, or technique to help you accelerate your test automation efforts. And today I wanted to go over how to leverage headless browsers. It's a new topic, or not a new topic, it's a topic that's been around for a while. But there's some new things that just came out recently that I think more folks are talking about headless browsing to see if it's something they actually should try, if they use it or not. And there's a lot of pros and cons between the two. So that's what we're going to be going over today. But before we do, I just wanted to go over some high-level news and what I found that has to do with automation in the news this week. All right, so actually, I didn't find a lot in the news this week. There's a lot of things I've been seeing. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Automation Guild is starting January 8th, but there's some other conferences that also are available. A few of them that come to mind are, there's I believe an SQA or SQE West conference that's going to actually be virtual. I'll have it in the show notes later on, the exact link and the person putting it on, but it's going to be a virtual conference. It's by the folks that bring you Star East, Star West. So that should be interesting. I think that's October 4th or something around that time. Later on, there's a conference dedicated to DevOps. I think that's October 21st, called All Day DevOps. Really interesting. I talked to these guys. I'm going to have a podcast episode with them in a few weeks. And they had 13,000 folks, I think, join them last year around DevOps. So if you're interested with anything with DevOps, you definitely should check that out. And like I said, if you go to automationguild.com/show, in the links for this episode, I'll have the links to those particular conferences. Also, March 1st, it's one of the only conferences I think I'm going to be at so far that I haven't confirmed, and that's going to be SauceCon, their second annual user conference. I had a great time last year, and it's going to happen again March 1st. So if you're anywhere in the San Francisco area, let me know. I'd love to meet you. If you're not going to the conference, maybe we can hang out during the day or after the conference, and that would be awesome. So another thing in the news is Google Chrome came up with something called Puppeteer, which is another headless instance of Chrome that you can utilize. And that's what got me thinking about this particular episode. So we're going to get into that later on. And also, if you use Postmon, it's an awesome browser extension for Chrome that you can use to test APIs. They came out with, I believe, so this is actually a pretty good resource. I don't know if you have it, SD Times. It's free. And I noticed last minute that they had something called, they added multi-region API monitoring to their solution. So you could check that out. Seems like a cool innovation. And I believe it's free too, so you can do some extra monitoring now. Not only can you actually do gets and post and things like that, but it has some new monitoring capabilities from location-specific places that I think you should be able to check out and leverage. That's going to help you with your automation efforts. So that's the news I found for this week. Like I said, I had not a lot of news going on that I could find specific to what we cover. But those are the top things. Just a lot of people announcing their conferences and some new things like with Google Chrome Puppeteer and also Postman. So I'm just going to double check the comments really quick, see if anyone has any comments here. And I'm terrible with names, so Bhagava, I'll get to that question in a few moments. What I want to cover now is I just want to jump in really quick on headless browsing. What I think is some things that you may want to know about headless browsing. The first one is, I keep getting a lot of questions. I just got a question recently. Joe, I know about headless browsing. Some folks using Phantom.js. Should I be using it? How should I use it? What is it? So what is headless browsing? It really is what it sounds like, right? It's running a test or running a script against a browser, but without the browser UI starting up. And there's a lot of pros and cons for doing this approach. If you're like me, when you think of automation, I'm very open when I include an automation. So it's not just automation testing. It's anything that I can automate to save someone time or to save them effort in any part of the software delivery lifecycle, whether it's developing, quality, testing, DevOps, any of that is what I include as automation. So headless browsing is actually something you can utilize for a lot of those efforts that we'll be checking out. So a few people say that it is faster, and it's not incredibly faster. I've tried it a few times. It's not like night and day, but it is faster. And some of the reasons why it's faster is not actually, you don't have to worry about it invoking all the JavaScript, the CSS, all the things that come with actually starting up a GUI of a browser. You don't have any of that overhead, so it tends to be quicker. Some folks say it's 2 times up to 10 to 15 times faster. So that's one huge benefit. Another one is you can use it to scrape websites. So you don't necessarily want to have to start up a website, go to it. You can just go to it headlessly and just scrape the HTML. You don't necessarily need to render a full browser to do that. And like I said, every time you set up a full instance of a browser, it's just extra overhead. And the less overhead you have, sometimes the quicker you'll get results back. And it may not necessarily be a test, and that's okay. Like I said, you want to leverage the right tools to do the right things. So if you want to do some scraping of websites to help you with the test later on, you don't necessarily have to have the overhead of starting a full-blown browser. You can actually utilize headless browsers to get that functionality for you. And also, a lot of times, you can't necessarily run a test on a machine that doesn't have a display because it needs to invoke the browser, the UI. So in those instances, you could use a headless browser for that. So it's really helpful that way. Also, I know a lot of developers that actually use it as they're testing websites and then mobile apps. It really helps them without having to refresh or upload things or start a browser instance. As they're testing, doing some little tests along the way, they find from a command line just running a headless browser saves a lot of time, a lot of effort. So like I said, you need to really know what is the goal of your test and what you're trying to do. A lot of times you have people either left or right saying, no, never use a headless browser. A real user would never use a headless browser. Why would you do it? And other people that would say, oh, you should always use headless browsers because it's always faster and faster is always better. So, as always, it's usually in between is what usually is true. It depends. And I know some people hate that, but it really depends on your situation, what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to do something, say, I know a lot of people use this for finding or downloading a PDF. You don't necessarily need to start a browser to do that. Or they do all types of other things behind the scenes like back-end testing. You don't need a full-end browser. But if you actually are doing a functional test and you want to see how it's going to behave as a real user is interacting with the browser, then of course you're going to want to start up a real browser instance because your real users aren't using a headless browser, right? So you want to do where it makes sense at the right place. Also, though, like I said, a lot of times I see testers that do everything overkill, like thou shall have a UI browser. And that's not true. There's some tests, for example, I do a very small smoke test after we do a build to our application. And all that smoke test does logs into the application. And I know that if it can't log in, that there's a build issue. That just happens to be the behavior of our application. Now, I could start a UI, But it's extra overhead. It takes longer. I just want a quick and dirty test that goes, can I log in? Nope. Okay, don't do the build. Don't run the rest of the test. I don't do that for all the tests, but that very first test, because I need that quickness, and because it doesn't matter if it's a UI browser, that's how I leverage a browserless or a headless browser. So here are some examples of why you may want to use a headless browser. I've gotten these from around the web. Like I said in the show notes, I'll have them, but Alan Richardson has a really good post on using headless browsers, pros and cons, what he sees for it. Watermelon had a post recently or a few months back on what his thoughts were on headless browsing. So here are a few things I found also from Stack Overflow, how people do use headless browsing. So some people, and I think it's a great user case, use it for test setup, so setting up data or to minimize resources, minimizing the resources that site on your application or on your machine locally. So like I said, a lot of times opening up multiple browsers can be a resource hog, but if you do headless, it's less of a hit on your resources, and therefore you could probably open up multiple instances of the browser and not have the resource hit. Also, if you need to verify a bunch of data before running a UI test, like I said, this is like a sanity test or a smoke test. This is a good instance of using headless browsers. Some folks use it for testing SSL. In that case, you don't necessarily need to start up a full-blown browser. You want to simulate a browser on a single machine. Say you want multiple machines, multiple browsers, simulating multiple browsers on a machine. You could do that with headless browsing. A lot of people do that for that particular use case. And also, when you're running a test on a headless system like Linux that doesn't have an OS or a UI, this would be a good time or a good place to use headless browsing because, of course, you're not going to be able to start up a browser in the full UI mode. So those are some reasons why it may be a good idea to use headless browsing. So I'm just going to check at the comments really quick to see if anyone has anything to add to that. Okay. So there's some reasons why you may not want to use a headless browsing solution. And some of them are you really need to mimic a real user. So if you really need to mimic a real user, of course, using a headless browser probably wouldn't make sense. Also, if you need to visually look at a test while it's running. This is actually a way that I think a lot of automation engineers don't leverage the automation test. Sometimes, rather than you having to go through to see if there's a real bug and actually manually going to certain pages or just running an automated test overnight, sometimes I'll just start up the test and I'll just watch it, right? And I'll just make sure there's nothing funky going on. That's actually a good debugging technique that for some reason a lot of people don't do. It's actually watch the test, right? And just see, hey, wait a minute. The automated test says it's passing, but I notice over here that, I didn't actually do a verification or an explicit check on this. I probably want to do that because I noticed that that's incorrect. So it helps you with debugging. So that's one reason why you wouldn't want to use a headless browser. Another reason a lot of people complain is debugging. So if you anticipate they're going to be doing a lot of debugging of your automated test, probably using it in headless mode, probably not the best instance or reason to use a headless browser. So there are a lot of different options out there, and especially the newer versions of some of these browsers like Chrome, Firefox, all have come out with versions that allow you to run them headlessly. The most popular one that I've seen or heard most of is Phantom.js, which is dedicated to headless browsing. You can run it from the command line using any or all platforms. Also, you're probably familiar with HTML unit. If you're using Selenium, a lot of people use that particular option. So like I said, there are a lot of different options. If you actually go to GitHub, a good tip I like to use when verifying or validating, is this a tool I want to use, is just seeing how active is the community. So if you went to Phantom.js, you'd probably see, I should have done this beforehand. I actually have a post that does this earlier in the year, but I didn't check recently how many stars it has. A lot of stars, so it shows it's really popular. A lot of active contributors to it. So whether it's a headless browser or any other piece of technology, that's a good tip to do. A lot of times I go into GitHub and just see how many people are using it and how active a community it is, actually for any open source solution. All right. So I don't know what happened here, but as I mentioned earlier in the news, Google announced Chrome Puppeteer. So if you go to Google Chrome Puppeteer, I actually have a link here embedded in the slide. It actually gives some really good reasons why you would use Google Puppeteer for headless testing. It's a headless API level to interact with the Chrome browser headlessly, which is pretty neat. So if you're doing any sort of DevOps, anything where you don't want to interact with something or have the overhead of a browser, this seems like a really cool option. And they go over some reasons why you might want to use it. Like I said, some of them are generating screenshots, PDF to get PDF pages, crawling different sites depending on what you need, capturing time trace. So a lot of cool use cases why you would use headless testing. Like I said, I'm not saying use it for all your scenarios, but in certain cases, if it's going to save you time or effort, why not use it if it makes sense? So definitely check that out. Once again, I'll have that in the show notes at automationguild.com/show. So as you'll see, as we'll listen to Greg coming up, Greg Pascal has a good segment coming up now that talks something like this around this topic, and that is use the tool that's right for the job. Right? You don't become a fanboy of a tool or say, every time, I know this is old, but every time you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. A lot of people use Selenium for stupid things, or a lot of people use full browsers or end-to-end testing when an API test could be better leveraged or a better use of your time. So anytime you're evaluating a tool, just see, can I do this quicker, faster, without impacting the user? And if I can, why not do it? But if you actually need to emulate a real user using a real browser, then of course you can use a real browser. And it's not one or the other. You can do maybe a small set at headless and then a bigger set going using a browser itself in full-blown UI mode or not. So it all depends on what you need and what you need to use. So like I said, after this show, it'll be available on YouTube, but I also edit them out. So anything awkward that I may have said, I'll edit out and I'll repost to automationguild.com/show. So I'm just curious to know if you go to the comments or if you go to automationguild.com/show in the comments, let me know if you're using headless browsing. And if you are, why you're using it, what your thoughts are on it. Have you had any success on it? And I would love to hear your thoughts around it. All right, so next, I'd like to get to a segment I like to call Greg Pascal in the Real World. If you don't know Greg, he has a great book on real-world automation. You can check that out at Amazon. And he's also a frequent contributor to the quality testing arena, so you've probably seen him on a lot of webinars. He actually was a speaker at last year's Automation Guild. So if you go to automationguild.com, 2017 event, you could see all of last year's event for Automation Guild.
Hello, fellow automators. This is Greg Pascal with Real World Test Automation Update. Today I want to share with you something about getting the most from your testing tools, or as I often say, using your tools as designed, not as discovered. This week I had a publication go out on TechBeacon. You can check it out, techbeacon.com, and the article is titled, "Are You Getting the Most from Your Testing Tools?" This is a challenge for most QA managers. We have endless amounts of tools laying around the shop. It's easy to lose track of what our team is using. There's a pretty good chance we've got more than one type of tool doing exactly the same thing. Think about just from an automation perspective. You might have HP in-house with QTP or BPT, and you might have Selenium as well. You might be using something like ALM or Quality Center and Jira. You may have development tools like IntelliJ or Sublime, both happening on your team. Maybe there's things like browser plugins, things that are tracking cookies or measuring load times. It's possible that your team has more than one type of tool that's doing exactly the same thing. So let's face it, technologists, we have this love affair with the next new shiny tool. I know, I'm like that. I've been like that since I was very young. Something new comes up, you hear about it, you read about it in a magazine or online or whatever, and you have this gadget crush for it. You just gotta have it. Often it comes up like this. There's one feature that this tool does that the other one doesn't. And that keeps driving us to go get the next tool. Think about social media. It was driven off of this idea. So you kind of want to keep up with the cool kids and get the next tool that everybody's using. And that sort of thing gets into our mind. This frenzy to play with all the new tools leads us to some of these problems. The reality is we lack of becoming experts at any one given tool. And if you think of across your whole team landscape, it de-incentivizes anyone from becoming a champion of the great tools you've either purchased or you know are really awesome. It also has this really negative effect that it models for our junior technologists, those young guys that are on our team, this bad habit that they'll begin to repeat, which is, oh, there's the next shiny tool, there's the next shiny tool, and we keep running after it. They begin to pick that up, and it makes the problem worse. And the end result is we get less excellence than really could be realized from the tools that are really, really great. So we get less quality using those tools in a certain way, and we also add higher risk because we're always novices playing with the next new shiny thing. We don't become experts at it. So here's some questions to consider. How do you pursue the very best tools with sniper-like accuracy? Well, in my article, I talk about creating a team tool strategy. That's right. This idea that you would actually get your team together and say, hey, everybody, instead of us just randomly choosing tools, let's put some intent, some strategy behind it. All tools, I'm talking every tool, commercial and open source, really needs to go through some kind of evaluation process. Okay, it could be a couple hours, it might even be a few weeks, but it really needs to go through this process. You need to look at things like identifying the needs that you've got, then determining what's the strength and benefits of each tool, and just get out Excel or something and do a side-by-side comparison of the tools you decide to evaluate. At the end of the day, the tools should save your team time without sacrificing quality. We're all about quality, right? That's what we do. So this should be something we're pretty good at. It should offer, the tool really should offer some type of training. And I'm talking about open source as well. Yeah, a lot of open source is just put together and thrown out there, but you can find folks that write great tools. Dave Hefner comes to mind when it comes to Selenium. That guy writes some great content. So whatever tool it is, make sure you can get some kind of training. And for Pete's sake, Google is not the way to learn to use a tool. I heard a friend of mine, an Italian guy, he lives here, and he says, guys, look, ranch dressing is not made for pizza. And I thought that was very clever. And in a way, Google is not the way we are to derive how to use a tool. Certainly, hey, I use Google every day to help me move along to things, but that should not be the primary way that you learn to use a tool. Okay? All right, a few more thoughts. So how do you get the most out of the tools that you decide to choose upon? Well, send one person or get one person on your team to actually get the training, or that they pursue that tool really, really well so they can become the champion of the tool. And also let them know that they're now responsible for training others. I learned about this I think it's often called a federated approach, where one person learns it and they teach another, and those folks teach others going forward. Watch out for this common problem of tool creep, and that is that other tools that do nearly identical thing start to come back into the mix of your other tools, and they dilute the expertise of the tools your team decided were the ones they were going to start using. And there's a crazy mindset that happens. I call it beware of the everything must be free mindset. No tool, even open source, is actually 100% free. I know I've got some guys out there freaking out when they hear that. Yeah, I know when it comes to the open source tools, a lot of times we think these are free. I could just download and start using them. If there's one thing I've learned in 35 years of being a technologist, nothing is free. At the end of the day, everybody's got to put food on their table, so there's some cost. Things like keeping current on the tool. How about learning the tool? How about, is the tool getting maintained? There's a cost to that. A cost in utilizing the tool. Imagine everything with the tool has to be done at the command line. That's great for the tech nerds on the team, but most of your folks on your team are not going to be like that. That's a very inefficient way of working with the tool every day. This can lead you to really poor tools just because it's available and you thought it was free. So watch out for that kind of everything must be free mindset. Spending even a little bit on tools. I think of great tools like Snagit can bring about huge benefits. So if you allocate for your team members even a small budget of a few $100s a year for tools for each of them, that can really add up to them being much more efficient. You know, tools like that often come with support. They're likely to continue to be developed and not get abandoned, and they're going to probably come with some kind of training, which often can be negotiated in at the time of the tool purchase. So it's a great opportunity to decide to be intentional to say, hey, we're willing to spend a little bit. I've got a budget of $100 for us to get this tool, or whatever it might be, and get the right tools. So here's some parting thoughts. Use a tool as designed, not as discovered. Have a plan and a discussion with your team about a tool strategy and how you choose to add new tools to your team. And look for tools that actually provide some kind of training or that you can get training on so you know you'll use that tool in the right way and you're getting the very most out of it. Well, everybody, this is Greg again, and I sure always love sharing with you a little tip for the week, and I hope you find this helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg, for those awesome tips. And like I said, you want to check out Greg's book, Real World Automation. Greg's an awesome resource. And this is one of the points I was trying to get to when I talked about headless browsing. You really need to talk to your team. It's not one or the other. Don't just use it because it's cool or there's some new thing or just you want to buff up your resume. It's you really want to choose the right tool for the right job. So definitely good advice from Greg there. Also, as you're developing, it is really a team effort. You don't want to be the only person that's supporting your tools. You want to make sure that you're constantly educating your team. You're getting that out there because you don't want to be the bottleneck if you were sick or even make it so you can't take any vacation time. So education really is an overlooked piece of automation. A lot of times you have just a few folks on your team that are automation experts and everyone else ignores it. In that case, it's probably going to end up in a pretty unsuccessful automation effort. So I'm just going to look at the comments really quick. I think I just saw a few come in. So Raja has my automation under test involves both desktop and web applications for test scenarios. We're using UFT. Is there an alternative tool for the same with lesser costs involved? Well, so there you go. It depends. And it depends on how much cost you really are saving in the long run if you go to an open source solution. So we do have teams where I work where they have to interact with the browser and a thick client application that's written like some old C#. And what they did, or C++ actually, they use a tool called White, the White framework, WHITE. And the White framework allows you to automate non-browser applications. And so that's one way you can do it. Also, Microsoft has something called Microsoft Coded UI, which does allow you to use Selenium, and you can interact with the client applications. That's kind of a paid solution, though. I think you need Visual Studio Pro at least for that. Other options that some folks use, they use something like Java with Selenium, and for some high-level automation, they'll use a tool like Sakuli. And Sakuli is image-based, so basically it looks for images, and that's how you're able to interact with it. I've seen some folks be very successful with that, and others not be as successful. So are there tools out there? Yes, but how much expertise do you have to develop those, and how much time and effort is it going to take? Where if you do have an open source, if you have a non-open source solution like UFT or SmartBear or whatever the vendor is that actually has that all out of the box. It all depends. Some teams, because they have the UFT expert already, can just run tests, not have to worry about it. Handles all technologies, especially if you work for a large organization. I used to work for an insurance company, so they had mainframe applications, all kinds of applications, web applications, and really I found UFT to be the best fit for that. But for newer development, just for web applications, you probably can get along with just Selenium. So it's up to you. You should evaluate them. So do a quick proof of concept if you do want to check out an open source solutions. Just see how much effort it's going to take you to build in all that functionality that all these awesome vendor tools already come with. So yeah, you may be saving cost up front, but in the long run, you're developing your own framework, your own expertise, your own bugs. So it's not really always you're going to save a lot of money. So just quick thoughts for the comments. Hope that helps. And I just want to let you know, if you don't know already, that this is Automation Guild. The Automation Guild show is sponsored by the Automation Guild Conference, which is an online conference dedicated 100% to all things test automation related. Go to automationguild.com. And I'll be updating this shortly because registration is going to open in a few days. But check out some of our speakers. We have a lot of cool speakers with us this year. We have Paul Grossman, Richard Bradshaw, Lisa Crispin, who wrote an awesome book on agile automation, agile testing. It's a lot of people from a lot of different countries this year also, which I'm really excited about. We have Mark, who's doing something on Rest Assured, Victor, who's doing full stack automation. We have some contributors to the Selenium and some other open source projects like Manoj is awesome. He does a lot with WebDriver, JS, and Protractor. We have Titus, who does a lot with Ruby. We also have Mark Fink, Jeff Cheesy Morgan, and TJ is doing a special bonus on automation questions you may get asked during an interview. I'm also going to be doing some roundtable discussions. I don't have this updated yet, where at the end of each day, I'm going to have two or three experts answer any questions you might have at the end of the day based on what the audience wants to go over. So I have Angie Jones that's going to be joining us for that. Paul, I'm not sure about Paul Merrill yet, but Paul Grisafi is going to be joining us. So it's going to be pretty interesting. And it's going to be like hopefully an open thing where you can join Zoom and join us live yourself. So check that out at automationguild.com. And I really appreciate you joining me for the Automation Guild show. Like I said, this is a new show, so I'm still tweaking the format. If you have any ideas on how to make it better, let me know. And if you want to participate in the Automation Guild show by appearing live and sharing a tip, tool, or technique, let me know. Head on over to automationguild.com/show. Leave me a message. Let me know you'd like to be part of the show, and I'll bring you in live. Currently, it's on Friday, but I'm going to change it to Thursdays at 12 just because Fridays sometimes my wife and I just want to kick off the weekend early, and having a show every Friday is kind of being a killjoy buzz. So it's probably going to be moving to Thursday. I'll do that announcement shortly. So that's it for the Automation Guild show. Hopefully you found this helpful. And as always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.